You know what's strange? The most famous shipwreck in history didn't just sink into the ocean. It sank into politics, money, and power. Now hear me clearly. This is not a story about an iceberg. Everyone already knows that part. This is a story about who was on the ship, who wasn't, and what happened 1 year later. Because in 1913, just 12 months after the Titanic sank, the United States quietly created one of the most powerful financial institutions in human history, the Federal Reserve. And ever since then, people have asked a disturbing question. Was the Titanic disaster just a tragic accident, or did it remove the last obstacles standing in the way of a new money system? Let's slow down, breathe, and walk through the story carefully, one step at a time. To understand this theory, we need to understand the world before the Federal Reserve. In the early 1900s, the United States did not have a central bank. That meant no single group controlled interest rates, no private institution controlled money supply, and no unelected board controlled credit. Money was backed largely by gold, and banks had limits. Now here's the key part. Many powerful bankers wanted a central bank. Why? If you skip without subscribing, you'll miss stories the world may never tell again. Once they're gone forever. Because controlling money means controlling governments, businesses, wars, and entire economies. But not everyone agreed. Some of the richest men in America believed a central bank would be dangerous. They warned it would concentrate power, create debt dependency, and weaken democracy. These men weren't poor outsiders. They were extremely powerful insiders, and 3 of them boarded the Titanic. Let's talk about names. Real people, real wealth. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world, worth billions in today's money. He openly opposed the idea of a central bank. Benjamin Guggenheim, from the famous Guggenheim family, another major industrialist, another skeptic of centralized financial control. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, former U.S. congressman, strong critic of elite financial monopolies. These men weren't radicals. They were insiders who believed too much financial power in too few hands was dangerous. And in April 1912, all 3 were aboard the Titanic. None survived. Now pause here. This alone proves nothing. But history doesn't stop there. Here's where people start paying attention. Some of the most powerful supporters of a central bank canceled their Titanic trips at the last minute. The most famous example? J.P. Morgan, one of the biggest banking figures in American history, a major supporter of central banking. And this matters, the financial backer behind the Titanic itself. Morgan owned the company that owned the ship. He was scheduled to sail. Then suddenly, he didn't. No illness, no emergency, just a change of plans. Again, this proves nothing. But people notice patterns. And history loves patterns. In 1910, 2 years before the Titanic sank, a secret meeting took place on Jekyll Island, Georgia. Attending were powerful bankers, politicians, financial strategists. Their goal? To design a central banking system for the United States. They knew Americans hated the idea, so they planned it quietly. Later, much of that plan became the Federal Reserve Act. But the plan faced resistance, strong resistance, from politicians, from businessmen, from wealthy industrialists, some of whom would later board the Titanic. April 14, 1912. The Titanic strikes an iceberg. What happens next becomes legend. But here's what matters for our story. The ship ignored multiple iceberg warnings, maintained high speed, had insufficient lifeboats. Was it arrogance? Negligence? Corporate pressure? Historians still debate. And once again, important reminder, no serious historian claims the Titanic was intentionally sunk. But conspiracy theories don't need certainty. They grow in silence, coincidence, and timing. And the timing here is uncomfortable. In December 1913, just 1 year after the Titanic disaster, the Federal Reserve Act passed. Quietly, just before Christmas. While many politicians were already out of Washington, President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. America now had a central bank, a privately controlled money system, and a new financial order. Wilson would later say, years later, that he regretted it. That line alone keeps this story alive. Let's be very clear and very fair. The theory is not that the Titanic was sunk on purpose. The theory is this: that the disaster removed key financial opponents, reduced resistance, and changed the political landscape at the perfect moment. Not planned murder, but opportunity. History is full of moments where tragedy creates power vacuums, and power vacuums get filled. This theory survives for one reason: because the Federal Reserve did change everything. It changed how money is created, how debt works, how inflation spreads, how wars are financed, and it did concentrate power. Even critics of the conspiracy admit that. So people ask, if money equals power, and power shifted dramatically after 1912, was the Titanic just a coincidence? Or a turning point? Titanic sank in 1912. Powerful opponents of central banking died. Federal Reserve created in 1913. Their absence made the Fed easier to pass. And that distinction matters. Because good storytelling doesn't lie. It invites you to think, whether you believe the theory or not. Here's the real takeaway. Power doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. After tragedy. After distraction. After grief. And the most important decisions in history are often made when people aren't paying attention. The Titanic sank into the Atlantic, but the questions it left behind never sank at all. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about what changed afterward. And sometimes, the real impact of a disaster isn't found underwater. It's found in the systems that rise after the waves settle. If you enjoy stories that make you question how the world really works, you might want to stay here. Because the next story explains how money quietly became more powerful than governments.